1. 3 years ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. Just by writing these lines and thinking about it, a feeling of fear comes back. Here's the background. It was June 2017. I was an 18 years young Ciel at the time. I live in a small town in Belgium, not far from the French border. I love my city. It is a very pretty and peaceful city. Nothing dangerous ever happens there, and I always had a feeling of security in it. In this city there are lots of schools, more than a dozen. So during the week it is crowded. We meet a lot of people. But during the weekend and the holidays when schools are closed, there is hardly anyone. It was a Sunday. The weather was good. That day I had to give a private math lesson in the afternoon to a little girl who lived 15 minutes by feet from my house. So I walked to her house. Everything is going very well. The teaching class is over and I decide to go home. It was a beautiful day. I was enjoying my walk. I arrived in an alley and there was nobody there. There was just an empty parking lot of a school. I continued my walk when I heard noises from behind me, like a woman in high heels. So far nothing serious. A woman in heels is not an exceptional sound. The steps get closer to me and the person ends up ahead of me so I can finally see them. It is not a woman in heels, but a man 40 years old maybe. An extremely tall man. He was a little overweight. He wore a very tight-fitting leather effect leggings. He had very straight, greasy black hair, and he wore wooden clogs. I couldn't stop looking at his feet because I've never seen anyone in my life wearing wooden clogs. I found it very unusual. He continues to walk, as do I. He was already at least 3 meters in front of me when suddenly he stopped. I continued to walk normally. I was arriving almost at his level when he turned to me and started to speak. At first, he asked me if I could tell him where the supermarket in the city next door was. I said to myself, it's okay that he got lost, no stress, I'll explain the way. I started to tell him that it's going to take a little time to get there by foot, but I still tell him the way. And from here, he tells me, "Oh, no, but I am looking for the way by car because I got lost. I come from France, and I often go to this store." Several details alerted me. One, if he came here by car, why did he stop in the city nearby to ask directions by foot? In general, when a person in a car gets lost, they stay in the car and wait for a pedestrian, then ask the way, and then continue by car. 2, if he's been to this store several times, how is it that he got lost? 3, why didn't he call me directly when he was behind me on the way? So even if I started to find this situation a bit strange, I still showed him the way, and I continued on my way home. Before I had time to leave, he stopped me again and asked, "By the way, what do you think of my wooden clogs? Isn't it weird?" I told him no, that if he likes them, it is the main thing, and he should not be ashamed of his clothing taste, etc. He kept talking about his wooden clogs, and then he came to talking about his leather effect leggings. He asked again about my opinion, and I told him it's okay, materials like this are fashionable, etc. He never let go of me. He continued to speak. He told me that he comes from France, that he went to school here, that he likes Belgium, that in his youth he often came, etc. All along I pretended to listen to him, to be kind, but deep inside there was an alert that said to me, "Be careful, you are in danger." He did not inspire any confidence at all in me. His strange look, his unusual voice, his eyes. God, something dark emerged from it and made me cold in the back. I was trying to find a way to leave without him realizing my discomfort. In my head it was very clear. I had to seem as calm as possible, not show my fear. I felt that if he noticed my discomfort, I'd risk something serious. So he continues to speak. I listen to him, and it continues for a few minutes. It was extremely long, so bear with me. The conversation is pretty basic so far, but that changed drastically when he started talking to me again about his leather effect leggings. He tells me that he loves leather, especially women who wear them. It gives him a charm that is exciting for him. The conversation becomes very unhealthy. He became more and more specific in his words, tells me about his fantasies of women who wear leather. The gleam in his eyes darkened more and more, and I had the impression that a monster was looking at me. Here again I try to look calm. I pray that someone will pass by here so I could leave, but there was literally no one. I thought of running away, but I quickly changed my mind. He was almost 2 meters tall, and I was just a little 18-year-old girl of 1.50 meters. I had no chance of leaving. My only thought was to text a friend so that she would call me urgently. It was very long. I can't remember the details exactly because it happened 3 years ago, and I was really traumatized. Anyway, I remained calm from the outside. He continued to speak. Deep inside, I was crying, but I remained calm and responded briefly to his words. His words came more and more trashy. I was alone in front of this man, but what he was about to say got me scared as hell. "If you want, my car is parked not far away. I have a leather suit in it. Do you want to come try it?" I was looking him straight in the eyes. I didn't know what to answer. I was completely paralyzed, and a miracle came. My friend calls me. I pick up the phone quickly. I speak to my friend in Spanish so the man does not understand what I'm saying. I tell her that I'm in a dangerous situation, that there is a weird guy, I'm scared. She tells me to go right now, to run. During the telephone conversation, I always kept an eye on him. He seemed embarrassed. So, always on the line with my friend, I tell the man, "Sorry, but I have to go. I have an important meeting." He looks at me and tells me, "Yes, but you're still going to try on the outfit." From there I tell him that I don't have time. He won't let go, won't let me go, and tells me, "Do you promise you wear it if we meet again?" I told him yes, and finally he let me go. Still on the phone, I walked normally until I reached another street where he could no longer see me. So I ran like never before to my home. When I got near my house, I waited a few seconds to be sure he didn't follow me. I had to be sure he didn't know where I lived. And I went home. I cried all my tears. When I was finally calmed down, I took the time to analyze everything that had just happened. I came to this conclusion. This man was not lost. This man did come from France. His accent confirmed it. When I met him in the street and he got ahead of me, it was to verify that there was no one but us. He must have spotted me when I left the teaching class. He also told me that he must certainly know the place to be so confident. He must have located the corner, a small, quiet town filled with young people, and very little movement, far from his country. The man had taken my city as a hunting ground. I thought about calling the police, or hide and follow him to his car so I could write down his number plate, but I didn't do it. Following him was far too dangerous, and if I had been to the police, I should have warned my mother, but I didn't either. I didn't want her to worry. I never saw this man again. Since that day, I keep asking myself what would have happened to me if I had met him overnight. I'm afraid when I'm in the street. I'm afraid when a car with a French number plate is parked near my home. This man traumatized me, and I'm still marked by the promise he made me keep. I feel like I've signed a pact with the devil. I have the impression that his sentence meant one day we will meet again, and on that day you will have no choice. I do not want this day to come. I am even thinking of getting a taser to protect myself, even if it is illegal here. Unfortunately, this story does not end there. It continues a year later. It is summer 2018, still in my city. You should know that I live in a residential street, and there are always lots of children playing in the street. Everyone knows each other in the neighborhood. I have a little sister who was 16 years old at the time, and a 4-year-old little brother. We never let him play alone without surveillance. When he played in the street, there was always someone from our family to watch him on the doorstep. This summer day, I was not at home. I went to a friend's house. When I returned home in the evening, my 16-year-old sister began talking to me. She was nervous. She told me that our little brother was playing in the street. My sister, sitting on our front door, was watching him, without taking her eyes off of him. In a moment, she saw a man staring at our little brother. He hadn't noticed that our little brother was not playing without surveillance, because from where he was, he couldn't see my sister. She was hidden by a bush. The man started to approach my little brother. When he finally noticed that my sister was there, he became embarrassed and stammered out a sentence. "Excuse me, do you happen to know where the city supermarket is?" When I heard that sentence, I thought I was going to faint. I directly thought of the man who scared the hell out of me a year earlier. I stopped my sister from talking and asked her, was he very tall? Yes. Did he have straight black hair? Yes. Did he have a particular feminine voice? Yes. It was too much for me. Now, I was sure it was the same man. I knew that he had returned. I knew he had tried to take our little brother. All my conclusions were true. This man was a predator. This man may be walking around my city right now to kidnap children. He may have succeeded. As I write down my history, I've never seen him again. I'm afraid for the children who play in the street, for the young girls who are walking around and may not have the same luck as I and my brother had. I'm scared when I have to come home at night. I'm scared of everything. Because I know that a monster is among us, so please, never let your children play without surveillance. Never let a stranger get you to some places. And always keep your phone close to you. 2. I was at the mall getting my phone repaired, and it was going to take a few hours. While I was waiting, I was just walking around the mall looking for stuff to do. It was getting late, and I still had a while to wait. Most stores began to close. I was sitting down and a person walked up to me and asked if I believed in God. I said that I do, and they asked if I had some time to talk about him. I said sure, and we were chatting for a few minutes on our own thoughts, pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. He asked me if I wanted to go to a gathering with him and a few people. I foolishly said sure. I was very bored and wanted to waste some time. I thought they were a little off, so I said, we can take my car. I took them to what they said was their church, but as we pulled up, it looked more like an old industrial building. They said they were in the middle of moving churches, so they're renting this place. I was really starting to think something was off at this point, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I walked in with them, and we went into a side room. It was me and the 2 guys that I drove, and there were 2 in the room already reading a book. I walked over and sat down, and they started talking about God. While they were talking, a guy came in and just kind of started standing by the door. I didn't think much of that at first. I thought he was late and wanted to be polite. Then the person reading the book started talking about the Queen of Heaven, and if I have been sealed yet. The conversation went like this. And the Queen of Heaven sealed all the followers of God. I assume you have been sealed. Queen of Heaven? Sealed? What are you talking about? I'm more of a modern Christian, but I've read the Bible. It doesn't say that. This is not the Bible. It's another book written by the Savior. What? It says in the Bible he shall rise from the east, and that is Kim Long Wang. I changed the name because I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember it was Korean sounding. I don't know what you're talking about. Sounds like you haven't been sealed. Is that correct? That question freaked me right out, so I stood up real fast, and then the guy next to me stood up. I ran at the door. The guy from earlier that was standing by the door started to move in a way saying, "We have to save your soul." I shoulder-checked him as hard as I could, and was able to get through the door and booked it to my car. Luckily, I was able to make it and burned rubber out of there. I felt very foolish after all is said and done, and as much as I enjoy talking about theology and philosophy in the future, I will likely handle a situation like that very different, i.e., I will not go to some random church in a cult abduction zone. 3. Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room for any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirt-back road, with nothing else for miles around. Heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shopping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in a city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across. So that gives you an idea what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. These 2 cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive one way to get between them, through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up between either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park. before you drive through these colossal canyons carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast flat interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska. Even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back, it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school, things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built-tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip into the mountains, past up Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets about dusk and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night through. Shout out to listeners in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at Subway for a lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides, with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This led to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job, and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee and was too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. Pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass, and started off into the woods. Now, this hadn't been the first time I'd done this. I'd been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad through childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumbass blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was, or so I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills, and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there. Just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off the woods, and set up to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here you're supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly poking his nose in your tent wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time it was getting late, about 10 p.m., but the sun was still high in the sky, and by the time dinner was over it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later, it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down into my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke up to voices in the distance, and slow moving crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few in some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest. "Who the fuck is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had fucked up and was getting up, grabbing my purse, and putting on my shoes so I could go apologize before I heard the man again. When we find you, you're fucking dead. You're on private militia property and trespassers get shot. That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until they got bored and left, then go back, pack up, and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot, before I heard the second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent, and were tearing it apart and going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "Bed's still warm," and
"Trespasser's a chick, she left her underwear."
The first man shouted out, "Okay, fan out and find her. Bitch thinks she can trespass and there's gonna be hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned that I left my spare change of underwear in my bag or that these creeps had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the man had faded quite a bit, I said fuck it and booked it as fast as I could in the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I'd care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had come up or down the road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on one side of the road and watched. A while later, several more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car and hopped back onto their ATVs and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this a warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They had cut up or destroyed all my gear, possibly as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then, I've taken great care to camp only in designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I know you weren't actually going to kill me, but nevertheless, let's not meet. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 506. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. When's this go up? I'm getting a little confuzzled by dates now. Let's see, this will be, I think, for... Done that one... The 15th, I think this is for. Okay. Halfway through the month, I think there's... I'm not sure, is there something released in the 15th, a book or something? I'm not sure. I've got a couple of things on pre-order. I'll have to check what's what. Anyway, as you guys get this, I should actually just about starting back work after what was hopefully a week off. We'll see. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.